Well, good morning, everybody. We're talking Pentecost today, and I kind of came out here. I thought it'd be nice to have the rain in the background, and as soon as I got out here, it stopped. But anyway, the passage today is Acts 2, chapter 1 to 21, and Pentecost is sort of considered the anniversary of the church. It's considered sort of when all this started, and the reason for that is Jesus had left. The disciples, it had been proven to them, their eyes had been opened, they finally got what Jesus was doing. And then he left them. They had a time on their own when it was just sort of going, okay, now what? And then the Holy Spirit came on the day of Pentecost. And the way I look at it is it was the aha moment. It was, they'd been sitting around thinking, okay, now what do we do? This is a huge thing. It's a momentous time in history, and we have no idea what to do next. This was the aha moment, and everything that happened from that day forward. That's what's led to us being here. And here I say that during the pandemic, and everything's going to be different afterwards. But anyway, but I think one of the things that really sticks out to me about Pentecost, and just like the function of the story and the need of having this story in the book of Acts, is simply because if you think practically about it, Jesus' mission was not to us. Jesus' mission was to the disciples. He had the 12 who were with him, and they traveled with him for 3 years. They were his students. And yes, he mingled with the crowds, and he taught the crowds and everything. Listen to that. You got lucky. Anyway, he went and he mingled with the crowds, and he healed, and he did that. But that was more of out of compassion. That was more. It wasn't really his specific ministry. His job was to teach the disciples and sort of whip up enough interest for them to go and start the movement that we now know as the church. And Jesus could not do that on his own. And there's arguments about Jesus, about his divinity and things like that. But no matter sort of where your Christology is, whether it's high and you think he was sort of fully God, even though we saw him as human, or whether it's very low and you think he's a human just like everybody else, I think a low Christology actually adds to the theology and the story personally. But it's for you to discern for yourself. But no matter where your Christology is, he was still one person walking around. He was limited to, I think he's 32, 33 years old. So that was, that length of time on earth. And he was only ministering the last 3 years of that. So, how many people can you talk to in 3 years from the Middle East and the early Roman, or the Roman Empire? It's just, there's physical limitations there. Jesus himself could not take his message to the rest of the world. For that, we needed something that was more, I shouldn't say more intangible, I should say less tangible than what a person could do. From then on, the movement would grow and grow and grow and grow, and especially in those days, communication long distance was really non-existent. We've got examples of the letters being sent around in the later part of the New Testament, and like it was hard to communicate even city to city. It was possible, but it was hard, and so we really needed something that was different than a person, and that's where the Holy Spirit comes in. I think the Holy Spirit, in my thinking, has just always been there. It's mentioned in the creation story, and there's surprising Holy Spirit references in the Old Testament for being such a New Testament sort of concept. But we needed something less tangible, something that was prayerful and dynamic and could sort of get beyond the way we think and do and things like that. And so I think that's the significance of this day. Without the Holy Spirit, we really couldn't carry on Jesus' mission in any great size. But I think the thing that we really need to be mindful of, and I know I'm a bit of a broken record on this lately, especially, but I think the thing we need to be mindful about with this um, is that Jesus, there's the disciples, this story especially is about meeting people on their level. Um, the church has this history of being very forceful and trying to get people to convert, not just to our religion, but our culture, um, from a Western perspective. And that's not right. People need to choose this. This needs to be something that they want to do, or even, if you force someone to do the best thing in the world, it's not going to be the best thing in the world anymore. You taint it, right? And we've done that over the history of the church. And if we look at this from a colonial perspective, we're going, oh, great. All these people in the crowd, and they get to be part of us, right? And we can have a very colonial attitude about it, but that's not what this was about. Peter spoke their language. They didn't speak Peter's language. They heard Peter in their language. And I think that's really important, just for how the church does things and how we should do things. We should be meeting people on their level. And that's tough. When you've got a religion that's evangelical by nature, that, we've got this thing that we want to share and we feel we need to share, and we've been told to share, it's very easy to see this stuff as, to put the colonial lens on it. But I think, if we can just remember that we're meeting people on their level, that's important. Let's talk for a minute about evangelism. Evangelism is really, really important, and sharing our worldview is really, really important. I think the question, though, is why, and the church is very divided on this, and I'm sure there's people watching this that won't like what I'm going to say, but we should not be thinking in terms of, who we're getting into our camp, how many souls we've saved, that kind of way. I don't think that's what this is about. I think that's the colonial lens looking at stories like this and seeing what we see naturally through the colonial lens, and that's not what this is about. When you look at the gospel, it's really about this. This is how to build a perfect world in a way that humans would not do and could not do on their own. And a guarantee that a perfect world will come. God has this plan, and God has this way that we would never think of on our own. And even when we're trying to follow, we go off track here, there, and everywhere. And so, we've got this idea, this beautiful idea, and you can sort of see how soul saving gets in there. Like, we are trying to save people, and we are trying to save ourselves and save the world and all this stuff. But it's not about like numbers, and I don't think God's, sort of vindictive in God's smarter than we are. God's bigger than we are and more compassionate than we are. And we've got to trust God that, it doesn't necessarily depend on us. Our inclusion in the whole plan depends on our cooperation, but God's going to do what God's going to do regardless of us. And I think, we've got to keep that in mind. But while we're talking about all this, if we have this understanding and this, I love the phrase good news. I'm all about sort of reinventing church language, because it has been tainted and means things that it's not meant to mean anymore. But I love that idea of the gospel being the good news. It really is good news. It's hey, we know how to save the world, and we're trying to save the world. Can you imagine if we kept that to ourselves? That's not the kind of thing you keep to yourselves. And I think that's the basis of evangelism. We've got this great thing we're trying to share. And anyway, and we should share it. And that's what today's about. Like, that's, we've got this great thing, and the Holy Spirit is saying, or this story is saying the Holy Spirit's going to be here with us, so that even when it gets beyond our ability, Peter wasn't, what is it, a polyglot, I think, when you can speak many languages. If a polyglot turns out to be something really awful, don't tell me. I think that's what it means. But, Peter wasn't that person, but that's how everybody heard him, right? And so the Holy Spirit If we really have the right things in mind, the Holy Spirit's going to work through us and help us to grow this group of people trying to save the world. So, this is a really happy story. It's a really exciting story. It's the Genesis, the beginning, and if you read on, all these stories of the early church in Acts, they're raw, everything's perfect. It's supposed to be this idealized picture for us to aspire to of what a church can look like. It probably wasn't actually like that way, but Luke, who wrote Acts, is trying to say like, this is the mold, right? This is a very positive spot in the Bible. So why the doom and gloom? Why does it end on this passage about the sun going dark and the moon turning to blood, and etc. before the sun shines on the day of the Lord? And I'd like to just, if you haven't been reading my Amos series, and I understand if you haven't, because the whole idea with the Amos series is let's do a deep dive just as a distraction from what's going on, and when else are we going to be able to do some long form thing like this? So I get it if you don't have time, or if it's, I'm just doing it for the few people that are interested and for myself, but go and have a glance at the Amos passage, because, I've talked a lot about or the Amos series, because I've talked a lot about how, if the world is imperfect and we're used to that, and then perfection is brought, that transition's going to suck. And I don't mean that in a punishing way or in a whatever way. That's the imagery we have in the Bible, but I think that's just what it is. It's imagery. They're trying to explain really bad times in the language and style that they had at the time. But one of the things I'm really wrestling with right now is this. Go look at the last entry of the Amos passage, or the Amos series, but just how far we have to humble ourselves if we want to live in an equal world and a truly, like, if we want to have everybody in the world meet in the middle. Think about how far down we've got to humble ourselves, and that's a tough pill to swallow. I don't think meeting in the middle in the end is going to be bad. Like the Bible claims that the world is designed in a way where everyone can live this fulfilling life, where we are our authentic selves because we are authentically playing our role in God's great plan. And you've got to have a certain level of care and protection and safety for that, to live that authentic life. So I don't think it's bad. But it's very different than what we're used to. And especially in the West, we are used to a lot of wealth and things like that. And so if we were to try and rectify that situation, it's going to be tremendously painful. And I think that's what that passage refers to. It's saying, before things are perfected, there's going to be, to borrow a phrase from the Bible, a lot of weeping and gnashing of teeth. We have this beautiful dream, but it's a disruptive dream. And so to get there, it's, if you're remodeling a house, you've got to tear the walls out before you can put new drywall up, I think that's what it's getting at. And so it is a positive passage. It is meant to be a positive passage, but it's also managing our expectations. It's saying this is going to be hard. It's going to be worth it, but, be ready. It's going to be hard. Anyway, I hope you take this story. Today's sort of more of a celebratory day. It's just sort of an anniversary day. But if there's one thing that I can really drive home right now, it's that we need to be meeting people on our level, and not from an air of superiority, not from an air of we know more than you do, but just from, hey, let's talk. Let's understand each other. I think I've got something to offer. Let's have a conversation.